Hey, it's Trevor, and today I'm showcasing the clearest Bigfoot videos of 2026 so far, from a remote research camp that becomes the site of escalating coordinated surveillance by Bigfoot to an investigator filming what Bigfoot did to a bulldozer. Dr. Hartwell had established her research camp 8 miles from the nearest trailhead in terrain. Her equipment setup included 12 military-grade trail cameras positioned throughout a 2-square-mile area, each capable of detecting heat signatures from over 100 yards away. The location was chosen specifically for its isolation from human activity, providing perfect conditions for observing natural wildlife behavior without interference. What she didn't realize was that her presence had already been detected by something. Bigfoot's first contact was a vocalization. The sound erupted from the darkness surrounding her camp on the evening of August 18th, a low, guttural call that seemed to originate from multiple directions simultaneously. The vocalization lasted 8 seconds and exhibited a resonant quality that suggested vocal folds far larger than those of any documented mammal. What made the sound truly disturbing was its conversational tone, as if the creature were announcing its presence somehow. Bigfoot wasn't simply marking territory or expressing aggression. It was communicating with intelligence that approached human levels while remaining distinctly non-human in its execution. The forest fell completely silent after the call, but this was just for a while. Audio analysis would later reveal that Bigfoot's vocalizations contained frequencies that could travel for miles through mountain terrain, allowing communication across vast distances without alerting prey species to the creature's exact location. The creature's first physical evidence appeared the following morning in the form of massive footprints circling Dr. Hartwell's campsite. The tracks measured 17 inches long and 7 inches wide, showing anatomical details that placed them outside any known species classification. 5 distinct toe impressions were visible, including what appeared to be an opposable thumb, while the depth of the prints suggested something weighing at least 600 pounds had made them during the night. Bigfoot's foot structure revealed adaptations that were perfectly suited for life in dense forest environments. Most significantly, the dermal ridges visible in the clearest prints showed characteristics that were neither human nor ape, but something entirely unique. Bigfoot had approached Dr. Hartwell's camp from multiple angles, studying her setup and identifying potential escape routes while maintaining perfect stealth. The tracks showed it had come within 15 feet of her tent, close enough to observe her sleeping form through the fabric before retreating into the forest without making a sound that might wake her. The creature's approach pattern demonstrated understanding of human behavior and defensive capabilities that could only have been learned through extensive observation of human activity. Bigfoot had identified the most vulnerable points in the camp's perimeter and had tested Dr. Hartwell's awareness levels by approaching from different directions throughout the night. This was reconnaissance behavior that indicated military-level tactical thinking. The second night brought escalation in the creature's stalking behavior that demonstrated coordinated intelligence beyond anything documented in cryptid research. Multiple vocalizations erupted around Dr. Hartwell's camp at 2:30 a.m., coming from different locations in a pattern that suggested either several Bigfoot working together or one creature moving with supernatural stealth through the mountain terrain. The coordinated nature of the calls indicated social structure and communication protocols that had evolved over thousands of generations. Each vocalization seemed to serve a specific purpose. Some were clearly positional reports, others appeared to be tactical updates, and still others carried emotional content that suggested the creatures were capable of complex social interactions. Bigfoot were not solitary animals, but members of a sophisticated society that had remained hidden from human detection for centuries. Between the calls, heavy footsteps circled the campsite in a deliberate pattern that revealed the creature's understanding of psychological warfare. Bigfoot was applying pressure without direct confrontation, testing Dr. Hartwell's responses and building fear through sustained presence rather than immediate attack. The palm structure suggested grip strength that could crush bone, while the fingertip patterns showed sensitivity that would allow for delicate manipulation of small objects. The creature had demonstrated remarkable restraint and intelligence by carefully lowering the food cache, examining its contents, and returning it to its original position without taking anything. This behavior indicated Bigfoot understood human food storage methods and possessed the manual dexterity to manipulate complex rope systems. More importantly, it showed the creature was studying human behavior rather than simply seeking easy food sources. The rope manipulation required understanding of mechanical advantage and not systems that suggested tool use capabilities far beyond any known primate. Bigfoot had solved the puzzle of the suspended cache without damaging the equipment, demonstrating problem-solving skills that indicated abstract thinking and planning abilities. The creature was capable of understanding cause and effect relationships and applying that knowledge to achieve specific objectives. The creature's message was unmistakable. It could access anything in the camp at any time, but was choosing to observe rather than attack. This level of strategic thinking and self-control indicated intelligence that approached human levels while remaining distinctly alien in its application. Bigfoot was conducting its own research on the human intruder in its territory, gathering information about human capabilities and intentions. This was hunting behavior that indicated intelligence far beyond simple predatory instinct. The creature was studying human psychology and using fear as a tool for control. The footsteps showed remarkable coordination and timing, with the creature maintaining perfect distance from the camp while varying its approach angles to prevent Dr. Hartwell from predicting its location. Bigfoot was demonstrating its ability to maintain surveillance while remaining undetected, a skill that required understanding of human sensory limitations and tactical awareness that approached military training levels. The creature's vocalizations showed complex tonal variations that suggested structured communication. Audio analysis would later reveal harmonic frequencies and rhythmic patterns that didn't match any known North American wildlife, with characteristics that indicated Bigfoot was capable of conveying detailed information through sound alone. The calls seemed designed to coordinate movement and share tactical information about the human target. The vocal patterns also revealed emotional content that suggested the creatures were capable of complex feelings and social bonds. Some calls carried what appeared to be concern or curiosity, while others showed clear territorial assertion and dominance displays. Bigfoot were not mindless beasts, but thinking beings with rich emotional lives and sophisticated social structures. Dawn revealed the full extent of the creature's capabilities. Massive handprints were pressed into the bark of a pine tree beside Dr. Hartwell's food cache, which had been suspended 15 feet above ground, according to standard bear safety protocols. The handprint showed 5 fingers with clear opposable thumbs, and the reach required to touch the cache indicated something standing at least 8 feet tall with arm span that exceeded human proportions. Bigfoot's hand structure revealed evolutionary adaptations that were perfectly suited for forest life. The fingers showed remarkable length and dexterity, with joint articulation that indicated the ability to manipulate complex objects and use tools. The third night brought the most sophisticated display of Bigfoot behavior ever documented. The creature's vocalizations began at 11:47 p.m., but were accompanied by rhythmic tree knocking that echoed through the valley in coordinated patterns. The impacts came from at least 3 different locations, suggesting multiple Bigfoot communicating through wood percussion in a language that had evolved over millennia. The tree knocking demonstrated tool use and environmental manipulation that placed Bigfoot intelligence far above simple primate behavior. The creatures were using the forest itself as a communication network, sending messages across vast distances through acoustic signals that could convey complex tactical information. The coordination required for such communication indicated social structure and cultural development that challenged every assumption about cryptid capabilities. Each impact was precisely timed and positioned to create specific acoustic effects that could carry different types of information. Bigfoot were using variations in rhythm, intensity, and location to create a sophisticated communication system that took advantage of the mountain terrain's acoustic properties. This was technology that had been developed over thousands of years of evolution in forest environments. The tree knocking also served as psychological warfare, creating an atmosphere of being surrounded and outnumbered that was designed to increase stress and reduce rational thinking in the human target. Bigfoot understood that fear could be used as a weapon, and they were applying psychological pressure with the same precision they used for physical stalking. At 1:15 a.m., the lead Bigfoot approached Dr. Hartwell's tent with deliberate stealth that showcased its predatory expertise. The creature's breathing was audible through the fabric, heavy and measured, indicating something with lung capacity far exceeding human norms. The respiratory pattern suggested a cardiovascular system that was adapted for sustained physical activity at high altitude, with oxygen processing efficiency that allowed for extended periods of intense exertion. When the creature pressed against the tent wall, the massive hand that splayed across the fabric was easily twice the size of a human hand, with fingers that showed remarkable dexterity and control. The pressure was carefully modulated to avoid tearing the fabric while still conveying the creature's immense strength and reach. Bigfoot was demonstrating its physical capabilities while showing restraint that indicated sophisticated understanding of human fragility. The creature's touch was exploratory rather than aggressive, demonstrating curiosity about human shelter construction and the vulnerable being inside. Bigfoot was conducting a physical examination of its target, learning about human defensive capabilities while demonstrating its ability to reach Dr. Hartwell at any moment. The psychological impact was devastating. The creature was establishing dominance through proximity rather than violence. The hand movements showed remarkable sensitivity and control, with the creature apparently able to feel Dr. Hartwell's heartbeat and breathing through the tent fabric. Bigfoot was gathering physiological information about human stress responses and fear reactions, adding to its understanding of human psychology and behavior patterns. This was scientific observation being conducted by a non-human intelligence. The pressure against the tent lasted 90 seconds, during which Bigfoot seemed to be processing information about human scent, body heat, and fear responses. When it finally withdrew, the creature moved with perfect silence despite its massive size, demonstrating stealth capabilities that allowed it to appear and disappear like a ghost in the mountain wilderness. Bigfoot's movement skills were so advanced that it could control every aspect of its interaction with the environment. Bigfoot's approach to the creek revealed systematic behavior patterns that suggested this was regular territory maintenance rather than random wandering. The creature followed specific paths through the forest that had been established over years of use, with route selection that minimized exposure while maximizing efficiency. Bigfoot's movement patterns showed understanding of terrain advantages and tactical positioning that indicated military-level strategic thinking. The creature's behavior at the creek revealed routine patterns that suggested this was regular territory rather than a chance encounter. Bigfoot approached the water with obvious familiarity, scanning the surroundings with systematic precision before crouching to drink. Its movements were economical and purposeful, indicating intelligence that planned each action for maximum efficiency and minimum exposure. The drinking behavior itself revealed physiological adaptations that were perfectly suited for wilderness survival. The creature's mouth and throat structure allowed for rapid water consumption while maintaining alertness for potential threats. Bigfoot could process large quantities of water quickly while keeping its head positioned for immediate response to danger, demonstrating evolutionary refinements that had been perfected over millions of years. Most significantly, the creature's posture and alertness suggested it was aware of the camera's presence, but had chosen to allow itself to be recorded. Bigfoot was controlling the documentation process, revealing itself only when and how it chose, rather than being caught unaware. This level of technological awareness indicated the creature had been observing human activity for extended periods and understood the purpose of recording equipment. The creature's decision to allow documentation suggested a deliberate choice to make contact with human researchers under controlled conditions. Bigfoot was managing the encounter to ensure its own safety while providing evidence of its existence to the scientific community. This indicated long-term strategic thinking and understanding of human social structures that went far beyond simple animal intelligence. The creature's decision to relocate closer to the creek on August 22nd demonstrated tactical adaptation that proved its intelligence was actively processing Dr. Hartwell's behavior. Bigfoot recognized that she was preparing for closer observation and adjusted its own strategy accordingly. Rather than avoiding the area, it chose to use her expectations against her, turning her research setup into an opportunity for controlled contact. The relocation also revealed the creature's understanding of human technology and research methods. Bigfoot had observed Dr. Hartwell's camera placement and equipment setup, understanding that she was attempting to document its presence. Instead of avoiding the surveillance, the creature chose to use it for its own purposes, demonstrating intelligence that could adapt human tools to achieve its own objectives. The forest's unnatural silence on the final day indicated Bigfoot's presence was affecting the entire ecosystem. Birds, insects, and small mammals had fled the area, recognizing the apex predator's dominance over their territory. The creature's influence extended far beyond its physical presence, creating a zone of control that encompassed several square miles of wilderness. The ecosystem's response to Bigfoot's presence revealed the creature's position at the top of the forest food chain. Every other species recognized its dominance and adjusted their behavior accordingly, creating a buffer zone around the creature's territory that ensured privacy for the final encounter. Bigfoot's ecological impact demonstrated its role as a keystone species that shaped the behavior of entire forest communities. As darkness fell on August 22nd, Bigfoot began its approach to the creek, with deliberate timing that suggested it had been monitoring Dr. Hartwell's position throughout the day. The creature's footsteps were audible from a distance, indicating it was no longer concerned with stealth, but was instead announcing its arrival for the final encounter. The psychological impact was carefully calculated to build anticipation and ensure Dr. Hartwell was prepared to document what was about to occur. The creature's approach pattern revealed confidence and control that indicated it was operating entirely on its own terms. Bigfoot had spent 5 days studying its human observer and had concluded that she posed no threat to its safety or territory. The final approach was a demonstration of trust and perhaps respect for Dr. Hartwell's persistence and courage in remaining in the wilderness despite obvious danger. At 8:41 p.m., Bigfoot emerged from the tree line, revealing itself in unprecedented detail. The creature stood 7.5 feet tall, with shoulders that were impossibly broad and arms that hung past its knees. Its entire body was covered in dark reddish-brown hair that showed natural variation and movement, proving this was living tissue rather than any artificial construction. The creature's hair showed seasonal adaptations and environmental conditioning that indicated a lifetime spent in mountain wilderness. The coat was thick and weather-resistant, with natural oils that provided protection against moisture and temperature extremes. The hair patterns showed wear marks from movement through dense vegetation, proving this was a wild animal that had never been in captivity or human contact. Bigfoot's head was conical with a prominent sagittal crest that indicated massive jaw muscles capable of crushing bone. Its face blended human and ape characteristics in ways that defied classification, with a flat nose, prominent brow ridge, and eyes that held unmistakable intelligence. The creature's facial structure suggested evolutionary adaptations that were perfectly suited for life in dense forest environments. The sagittal crest revealed muscle attachment points that indicated bite force far exceeding any known primate, while the jaw structure suggested the ability to process a wide variety of food sources. Bigfoot's dental adaptations allowed for both meat consumption and plant processing, indicating an omnivorous diet that could adapt to seasonal food availability in mountain environments. The creature's gaze was alert and calculating, constantly scanning the environment with predatory awareness that missed nothing. The eyes showed intelligence that transcended simple animal consciousness, with focus and attention that indicated active thinking and decision-making processes. Bigfoot was not operating on instinct alone, but was actively analyzing the situation and planning its responses. The creature's movement patterns revealed perfect adaptation for forest environments. Its gait was fluid and compliant, with knees slightly bent and weight rolling from heel to toe in a motion no human could replicate comfortably. Every step was placed with precision that avoided disturbing loose rocks or breaking branches, demonstrating stealth capabilities that had been refined over millions of years of evolution. Bigfoot's locomotion showed remarkable efficiency and grace despite its massive size. The creature could move through dense forest without creating noise or disturbance, indicating muscle control and coordination that exceeded any known primate capabilities. The movement patterns suggested the ability to switch between different gaits depending on terrain and tactical requirements. The creature's behavior was natural and unhurried, suggesting this was routine territory maintenance rather than a special event. Its massive hands showed remarkable dexterity as it cupped water, with opposable thumbs that indicated tool use capabilities far beyond any known primate. The drinking behavior revealed physiological adaptations that were perfectly suited for wilderness survival. The creature's mouth and throat structure allowed for efficient water consumption while maintaining alertness for potential threats. Bigfoot could process water quickly while keeping its senses focused on environmental monitoring, demonstrating evolutionary refinements that had been perfected over millions of years. The creature's hands showed evolutionary adaptations that were perfectly suited for forest life. The fingers displayed remarkable length and dexterity, with joint articulation that indicated the ability to manipulate complex objects and use tools. The palm structure suggested grip strength that could crush bone, while the fingertip patterns showed sensitivity that would allow for delicate manipulation of small objects. The creature's intelligence was evident in every movement and gesture. It paused frequently to scan the forest with systematic precision, its head turning in patterns that indicated tactical awareness of potential threats from multiple directions. Bigfoot's eyes reflected the camera's infrared light with an amber-green glow that seemed to pierce directly through the darkness to Dr. Hartwell's hiding place. The scanning behavior revealed understanding of environmental threats and tactical positioning that indicated military-level awareness. The creature's head movements followed patterns that ensured complete coverage of potential approach routes while maintaining focus on the primary task of drinking. Bigfoot was capable of multitasking at levels that exceeded human capabilities. At one point, the creature looked directly toward the camera position with an expression that was unmistakably aware and curious. Bigfoot knew it was being recorded and had known throughout the entire encounter, but it had chosen to reveal itself on its own terms rather than being discovered accidentally. This level of control over the documentation process indicated intelligence that approached human levels while remaining distinctly alien in its application. The direct gaze revealed eyes that held ancient wisdom and intelligence that had been observing human activity for generations. The creature's expression showed curiosity about the human observer, but no fear or aggression, suggesting confidence in its own abilities and understanding of the situation. Bigfoot was making a conscious choice to allow documentation of its existence. The creature's facial features were clearly visible in profile as it drank, showing bone structure that was massive and robust, designed to support tremendous muscle mass while maintaining the flexibility required for complex facial expressions. Bigfoot's eyes held an awareness that transcended simple animal consciousness, suggesting cognitive capabilities that challenged every assumption about non-human intelligence. The facial structure revealed evolutionary adaptations that were perfectly suited for communication and social interaction. The creature's expressions showed emotional range and complexity that indicated rich inner life and sophisticated social bonds. Bigfoot was not a mindless beast, but a thinking being with complex thoughts and feelings. When the creature finished drinking, it stood slowly and turned to face Dr. Hartwell's position directly, acknowledging her presence with a gaze that was neither hostile nor friendly, but simply aware. For a moment that lasted an eternity, the ancient intelligence behind those amber eyes studied the human who had been trying so desperately to document its existence, perhaps evaluating whether she was worthy of this unprecedented revelation. The final exchange between human and Bigfoot represented a moment of contact between two intelligent species that had shared the continent for thousands of years without official recognition. The creature's acknowledgement of Dr. Hartwell's presence suggested respect for her persistence and courage, while also serving as a warning that future encounters would be entirely on Bigfoot's terms. Then, without haste or concern, Bigfoot turned and walked back into the forest, its massive form disappearing into the darkness with the same supernatural stealth it had demonstrated throughout the 5-day encounter. The creature had accomplished its objective, allowing itself to be documented clearly enough to prove its existence while maintaining complete control over the terms of contact, leaving behind 58 seconds of footage that would change cryptozoology forever. The file runs just over 2 hours, and the first hour or so is exactly the kind of footage you'd expect from a routine post-winter wildlife monitoring sweep in interior Alaska. Snowpack depth measurements, bark scoring from moose activity, checking trail cameras that had been running unattended since November. Then the footage changes. At 1:12:47, something steps into frame in the far background, between a cluster of black spruce trees, maybe 200 yards out. It's not sharp, it's not clean, but it's tall enough to interrupt the horizontal line of lower branches in a way that nothing in that forest should. A black spruce at that density doesn't produce shapes that tall, that upright, that proportioned. Whatever it is stands there for approximately 4 seconds, and then it's gone. Grady doesn't react because Grady doesn't see it. He's looking at scat on the ground 6 feet in front of him, crouching, marking a GPS point. He has no idea. And that, the gap between what he knows and what I can see on the footage, is what makes watching this feel like holding your breath for 2 straight hours. That is Bigfoot, standing in the trees, watching him work. If the goal of a monitoring sweep is awareness and control of the terrain, what happens when something else has already taken that control away from him? Bigfoot doesn't drift or blur the way a branch would in wind. It holds. It shifts its weight slightly, the way a standing animal does when it's been still for too long. Then it pulls back behind the trunk of the largest spruce in the cluster, and it's gone. But Bigfoot isn't gone for long. I have to slow the playback down to confirm it, because at normal speed it barely registers. But at half speed it's unambiguous. The shape doesn't drift or blur the way a branch would in wind. It holds. It shifts its weight slightly, the way a standing animal does when it's been still for too long. Then Bigfoot pulls back behind the trunk of the largest spruce in the cluster, and it's gone. 6 minutes later, Bigfoot's back, or something that looks exactly like it is back, and this time it's closer, maybe 120 yards now, partially obscured behind a different tree, but visible enough that you can make out the silhouette shifting its weight from one side to the other, still watching, still tracking him. And still, Grady is oblivious. He's moved on to checking a trail camera mounted chest high on a birch, pulling the memory card, writing down the serial number, just working. I genuinely don't know whether to feel worse for him because he doesn't know, or worse for myself because I do. And Bigfoot's haunting is barely the beginning. Then audio picks up the signals before the camera really commits to them visually. Low, rhythmic knocking sounds, not the rapid, erratic tap of a woodpecker, but spaced out. Deliberate. 2 knocks, pause, 2 knocks. The interval is almost metronomic. Then something different, a hollow clicking, like 2 stones being brought together hard and slow, somewhere deep in the tree line. Not close, but not far either. The microphone catches it cleanly. No distortion, no ambiguity about what it is. If these sounds are deliberate communication, who are they meant for, and why isn't the intended target responding? What's ambiguous is that Grady doesn't respond. He doesn't pause. He doesn't glance up. He continues reading off coordinates mid-sentence without missing a syllable. I've watched that segment probably 30 times now. He's not suppressing a reaction. He genuinely does not register it. And that bothers me more than almost anything else in this footage because those sounds are loud, they're not subtle. Bigfoot is making them on purpose, and the man they're directed at cannot hear them. But what Bigfoot does next on camera I still can't fully account for it. By 1:26:55, the pattern is established, and it's impossible to ignore once you've seen it once. Bigfoot crosses behind Grady in full frame, not partially obscured, not at the edge of the shot. Fully upright, full stride, covering maybe 30 feet in 2 steps. The movement is almost silent. No breaking branches, no crunching snow. Just mass moving through the forest faster than mass that size has any right to move. If something that large can move like that without a sound, what chance does he have of reacting in time when it decides to stop holding back? And then 5 minutes later, it's stationary again, roughly 30 yards out, in a gap between 2 spruce clusters, watching. The pattern is completely consistent across every appearance. Bigfoot shows up when Grady's back is turned or when his head is down. Every single time the camera swings in that direction, it's either gone or just barely out of frame. It knows exactly where the lens is pointing. That's not a coincidence. That is deliberate spatial awareness, and it means Bigfoot isn't just hiding. It's managing its exposure. It's hunting, and I mean that in the precise, calculated sense of that word, but that's not even close to the worst thing Bigfoot does. There are 4 more appearances in the next 10 minutes that I haven't mentioned yet, because individually they're easy to rationalize. A shadow at the wrong angle. A dark shape that could be a stump if you're being generous with your interpretation. But they're there, and when you map them out chronologically against Grady's movements, the spatial logic becomes unavoidable. Bigfoot is not following him at random. It's moving parallel to him, staying at consistent distances, adjusting when he adjusts. Then Bigfoot appears briefly on his left at about 50 yards. Moments later, the Sasquatch is now on the right side, closer, maybe 40 yards. How many angles is he exposed from at any given moment, and which one is it going to choose? And then Bigfoot became directly behind him, and this one is the clearest of the 4 because Grady's camera swings backward when he turns to mark a waypoint on his GPS, and for about 2 full seconds, Bigfoot is visible center frame before registering that the lens has rotated and stepping behind a spruce trunk. 2 seconds isn't long, but it's long enough to make out height, posture, and the fact that it was already in motion when Grady turned, which means it didn't freeze because it heard him move. It reacted to the camera rotation specifically. I've watched that clip so many times the file has started to feel worn out, and I still don't have a clean explanation for how that level of awareness works. But it does. If it's reacting to the camera itself, not the man, what does that say about what it thinks the real threat is? And when? Does it decide the threat is gone? And then Grady almost sees it. At 1:31:14, he pauses mid-step. His head comes up slightly. The camera holds on the tree line for almost 3 full seconds, and the shape is right there, partially behind a spruce, but the silhouette of one shoulder is fully visible in the gap between 2 trunks. Grady's gaze sweeps left, then right, then back down. He missed it by about 8 degrees of arc, 8 degrees. If he had turned his head that fraction further, he would have been looking directly at it. The shape doesn't move for those entire 3 seconds. It holds completely still while his eyes pass within inches of its position. He resumes walking. The shape shifts behind the trunk and disappears. I've watched that clip more times than I can count, and every time I watch it, I'm screaming at the screen. He almost had it. He almost knew. But something was not ready for him to know yet. Most predator encounters, the dangerous ones, involve a period where the animal decides whether the human is prey or threat. There's circling, there's noise, there's displacement behavior. What's happening in this footage is different. There's no testing. There's no ambiguity in the behavior. Bigfoot made a decision about Nico Grady before he ever walked into that section of forest. And it has been executing on that decision from the moment the footage begins. The knocking, the positioning, the disappearances timed to the camera angle. This isn't instinct. This is planning. At 1:44:10, the forest goes quiet, not gradually, not the way sound fades when you move away from a stream or when the wind shifts, all at once. Nothing. No background movement, no distant branch creak, no trace of wind. Even the sound of Grady's own footsteps seems to flatten, like the air itself has changed its acoustic properties. Grady notices it. You can see his pace slow slightly, his head coming up from the notebook he's been writing in. He looks around once, casually, then starts talking to the camera in a different register than before. He makes a joke about how the woods just decided to shut up. His tone is light, but it's the lightness of a man filling dead air, talking to cover silence he doesn't know what to do with. He keeps moving, but the commentary has changed. He's narrating now, keeping himself company. His GPS unit beeps 3 times in quick succession, and he glances at it, frowns briefly, and notes that he's apparently drifted off his planned route by about a quarter mile. He can't figure out exactly when it happened. He marks the position and adjusts his heading, not realizing that the detour has taken him deeper into a narrower section of the drainage valley, terrain that tightens on both sides, with rising ground that funnels movement toward the center. If his goal is to stay en route and maintain control of his position, how did he end up exactly where something else would want him? He's being herded by Bigfoot. I don't say that lightly. I've looked at the topography of that area, and the quarter-mile drift puts him exactly where the terrain would be most advantageous for something large to close distance quickly without being seen from multiple directions. Whether Grady was walked into that position or drifted there on his own, it doesn't matter at this point. He's in it. Then Bigfoot's clicking comes back, sharper, closer, higher frequency. And Grady hears it now. He stops mid-step, one boot in the air, then down, hard, as he freezes completely. Half a second of silence. Then he says it, almost laughing, almost asking what that was. His voice is still trying to be casual, but the camera is already moving. His head is turning fast, scanning the tree line left to right. You can feel the shift in him, the way the footage changes energy. Whatever compartment he had that sound locked in for the past 40 minutes has just been forced open. When the mind finally catches up, what does the body still have time to do? And then Bigfoot almost touches him. But before we get into that, you need to see this, because I found something else while watching this footage. Evidence and more discoveries that I can't put on YouTube. Things that were taken down, ignored, or completely removed. I gathered everything into one file. If you want to see it, it's in the description. Now back to the footage. Grady is writing in his field notebook, his back to a cluster of spruce, and Bigfoot comes out of the trees on his left side and moves to within approximately 15 feet of him. 15 feet. You can see the mass of it, the dark bulk at the edge of the frame, and Grady is standing there with his head down, writing. His pen is moving. He is completely unaware. The shape holds there for 4 full seconds. I have counted, and then a branch somewhere behind Grady pops with the cold, and it withdraws back into the tree line before his head comes up. He had no idea. The clicking comes again, louder, and now it's layered with something heavier, a low, rhythmic sound that isn't clicking at all, more like something massive shifting its weight on compacted snow. Grady is standing completely still in the middle of that drainage, and he is being chased by Bigfoot, and I think somewhere in the back of his mind, he just understood that. Brush detonates moments later. That's the only word for it. A section of dense undergrowth, maybe 20 yards to his left, erupts with enough force to shake loose a small avalanche of snow from the branches above it. Nothing visible behind the disturbance. Grady pivots toward it, breathing already picking up on the mic. He calls out standard protocol, announcing himself as a ranger and asking if anyone is out there. No response. Just the settling of disturbed branches, and then nothing again. Then seconds later, it happens on the opposite side, heavier, closer, 15 yards maybe. A sound like something the size of a refrigerator moving at speed through brush. It doesn't bother parting. Grady pivots again, faster this time, and his breathing is not controlled anymore. If there's nowhere left to turn, how do you survive a force that's already surrounding you? The thump arrives at 1:48:12, and it is not a branch falling, not an animal stepping off a log. It's the sound of concentrated weight landing on compacted snow from height. Grady spins. The frame blurs completely for almost a full second as his whole body rotates, and then it resolves. And Bigfoot is there, not at 200 yards, not at 120 yards, not at 30 yards. Right there, within arm's reach of him, upright and enormous. How do you react when the threat is already closer than safety itself? And when the frame stabilizes for a fraction of a second, you start to pick up detail, real, physical detail that's hard to dismiss as shadow or trick of light. The shoulders are too wide, sloping forward into arms that hang lower than any. Humans would, the proportions just slightly wrong in a way that feels instinctively threatening. The body isn't clean or uniform either. It's layered in thick, dark hair that looks matted in places, clumped like it's been moving through wet brush or snow melt. There's a heaviness to it, not just size, but density, like every movement carries weight behind it. Even standing still, it doesn't feel still. There's a subtle shifting, a tension in the posture, like it's coiled and deciding. And then there's the head. It's not exaggerated or monstrous in the way people expect. It's worse than that. It's restrained, almost human in structure, but pushed just far enough out of proportion to feel wrong. The brow sits low, casting the eyes into shadow, but you can still catch the direction they're facing. Locked forward, fixed, not scanning, not curious, focused. The face doesn't move much. No visible expression, no open mouth or display. It doesn't need to. Stillness reads as intent, and what stands out most watching it back is how comfortable it looks in that space, like it didn't stumble into the frame or react to the ranger's presence. It was already there, already positioned, already waiting. The scale of Bigfoot relative to the surrounding trees makes the brain work to catch up with what the eyes are processing. And the footage suggests the Sasquatch came down from above, either dropped or jumped from one of the larger spruce trunks flanking that part of the drainage. It didn't walk up, it arrived. If the predator chooses where and when to appear, can escape ever be planned? Grady's body reacts before his mind has a chance to consult. He goes straight back, not a step backward, a full body collapse backward, arms windmilling, legs kicking out, landing hard on the snow and ice. The scream that comes out of him is not something he controlled. It's the raw, involuntary kind that the body produces when it has been pushed so far past its thresholds that social conditioning doesn't have time to filter it. How do you fight when the only response left is instinct? He scrambles backward on his hands and feet for maybe 2 seconds, then gets his legs under him and bolts. The camera swings violently. Branches whip across the lens hard enough to leave streaks. His breathing spikes into the kind of short, ragged bursts that mean the body has handed the controls entirely to adrenaline. Whatever happens to his body for the next several minutes, he is not going to feel most of it. If awareness fades under panic, can he still outpace what's hunting him? The chase is immediate, and it does not build gradually. It is already at full intensity before Grady has taken 10 steps. Behind him, heavy impacts land in a pattern that is not random, crashing through underbrush. It's directional and adjusting. When Grady cuts left around a dead spruce cluster, the sounds behind him cut left too. When he angles, slightly uphill to avoid a section of broken ice, the pursuit adjusts. Bigfoot is not chasing the noise, it's tracking his movement and anticipating his line of travel. Footage shows that Grady's right boot catches the edge of a partially buried fallen log, and he goes down hard. You hear the impact, hear the grunt punched out of him, hear the brief scrambling of someone whose legs are not cooperating, but he does not stop. He's back up in under 2 seconds, still running, still pushing. That fall should have ended his forward movement. It doesn't, because adrenaline has essentially converted his body into a machine that doesn't take damage assessments into account anymore. If pain is ignored, how long before the body finally betrays him? Branches are hitting him in the face and arms now, with enough frequency that the camera lens is starting to catch intermittent drops of blood. Not pooling, not smearing, just the quick spot of a cut that hasn't been noticed yet and won't be. At one point, he makes a sharp gasping sound that's distinct from his breathing pattern, likely a branch catching him across the face, hard enough to open something on his cheek or forehead. His footing is getting worse as the drainage terrain starts rolling unevenly beneath him, with patches of exposed root and ice-covered stone that he's crossing at a speed his body is not equipped to navigate safely. I want to say this for context. Most people in the physical state Grady is already in, winded, bleeding, one leg compromised from that fall, would have gone down and stayed down by now, but he hasn't. That's not heroism. That's what the body does when it genuinely believes it is going to die if it stops. At 1:50:22, you get the clearest view of Bigfoot in active pursuit that the footage provides, and it is the frame I keep coming back to. Grady has hit a slight downhill grade, and the camera angle, as his body pitches slightly forward with the slope, captures a fraction of a second over his right shoulder. Bigfoot is maybe 40 feet back, moving through the trees at a speed that reads as effortless, not sprinting, not crashing, but covering ground with a long, fluid stride that eats up the distance between them in a way that makes Grady's panicked sprint look like jogging by comparison. If the hunter moves effortlessly while you struggle, can you outthink what outpaces you? There's no wasted movement, no flailing. It is completely, terrifyingly controlled. Bigfoot's not running because it has to. It's running at whatever pace ensures it doesn't close the distance too fast. That deliberateness, the sense that it is managing the chase, not just reacting to it, is the thing that gets under my skin. It was pacing him. It wanted him running. The terrain drops sharply, and Grady goes with it, loses his footing completely on a slope of slick, exposed shale beneath a thin layer of snow, and tumbles sideways. The camera goes with him, catching. Rotating flashes of gray sky, dark tree trunks, white ground. He hits something hard mid-roll. You can hear it, and the grunt he makes is different from the previous ones. Lower, involuntary in a different way. When the ground itself becomes a threat, where is safety? He gets up, but his movement is not the same. There's a pronounced hitch in his stride now, a slight drag on the left side that wasn't there before. Something in his knee or ankle that the fall rearranged. He's running on a broken part. Adrenaline is covering it, and it will continue to cover it right up until the moment it can't. I'm watching the gap between those two things closing in real time, and it is genuinely one of the more difficult things I've sat with in a long time. How long can the body lie to the mind before truth catches up? He hears the water before he sees it, that distinctive rush of a fast-moving creek that hasn't frozen through. And the camera swings toward it just as the ground slopes, hard toward the edge of a ravine, maybe 12 feet down, maybe 15. Grady slows for half a step, one beat of hesitation, and then from behind him comes Bigfoot with the heaviest impact of the entire sequence, close enough that it reverberates on the audio as a physical pressure. The branches 40 feet behind him shake loose a cascade of snow that the camera briefly catches in the peripheral edge of the frame. That half step disappears. His body rotates toward the edge, his arms come up for balance, and he jumps. The camera captures the fall in a chaotic sweep of sky and rock, and then the water swallows the frame. The impact knocks the breath out of him so hard that the microphone catches it as a single compressed burst of sound. He surfaces, gasping, fighting for orientation in water that is moving faster than he's prepared for, pushing him sideways against the downstream current. His movements are already degrading, not because of injury alone, but because the water temperature is doing what water that cold does almost immediately. When the environment conspires with the predator, what remains to fight with? He makes the bank, dragging himself over the edge of the ice margin onto frozen ground with movements that are no longer running or scrambling. They're the slow, shaking crawl of a body that has spent everything it had. After everything is spent, is there enough left to survive? He collapses onto his side, shaking in long, uncontrolled waves that the camera records as a stuttering vibration across the entire frame. His breathing is ragged and wet-sounding. He manages to get one arm underneath himself and push up slightly, enough to turn his head, slowly, toward the ravine above, and the camera tilts upward. Bigfoot is standing at the edge, looking down, completely still. I don't like what that distinction implies about what happens next. The camera tilts back down as Grady's head drops. His body is shaking hard enough that the footage vibrates. He manages to turn slightly, scanning the tree line on the bank side, the side he landed on, and that's when the camera catches them. Multiple Bigfoot standing in the trees, spaced out along the bank at irregular intervals, partially obscured by spruce trunks and brush, but present in a way that is unmistakable once you've seen the first one. Not one, not two. Several Sasquatch arranged along the tree line like they were already there, waiting on this side of the ravine. The water wasn't an escape route, it was a funnel. If every path leads into the hunter's design, where can Grady run? Grady makes a sound. I'm not going to call it a scream because it isn't one. It's lower than that, quieter, broken in the way that sound is when the body doesn't have enough left in it to make it properly. He whimpers and cries. He collapses forward. The camera tilts down, pointing at the frozen ground inches from his face. His breathing slows. The adrenaline is just gone. What comes in after adrenaline drops is everything the body spent the last several minutes postponing. The pain from the knee, the cuts, the cold, the impact of the water, the roll on the shale. It all arrives at once, and the body cannot process it all at once, so it collapses. The last stable frames that give you a clear image show one of the Sasquatch moving out from the tree line. Grady's camera doesn't swing toward it. He can't make that movement anymore. The angle drops slightly as his body shifts on the frozen ground, involuntary, not intentional, and the frame catches only the lower ground in front of him, the snow, the base of the nearest trees. Ranger Nico Grady was reported missing on February 19, 2026. When he failed to log his return from the monitoring sweep. His truck was found at the trailhead with his personal gear in the cab: phone, wallet, a thermos of coffee that had gone cold overnight, his equipment, minus the body cam, which was recovered from east. The location where it detached was never found. The AI wasn't asked to confirm anything. It was tasked with a much harder job: find the inconsistencies. Feed it the evidence and let it do what it was built to do: detect deception, flag fabrication, and surface the cracks that human researchers tend to miss or overlook. If any part of this story was falling apart, the system would find it. What it returned instead was the opposite of that. Not a case unraveling, but a case snapping together Bigfoot footage with 48 years of Ohio history that nobody had ever bothered to connect. The 8 witnesses who came forward during the March 2026 flap were not the kinds of people who go looking for Bigfoot on weekends. They were hikers, dog walkers, a mother and daughter who were just driving along Route 303, and a woman near Lake Milton who was out for an evening walk. None of them had a history of paranormal claims. None of them were affiliated with any Bigfoot research group. Several of them were reluctant to talk at all because they were aware of how the story would sound to their neighbors, their co-workers, their families. What the AI came back with across all 8 interviews was striking on multiple levels. First, there were no significant performance indicators. The stress patterns in the witnesses' voices were consistent with genuine fear responses, not the elevated but controlled presentation you see when someone is telling a story they've rehearsed or embellished. These people sounded, at least to the AI, like they had been genuinely frightened by something. If they weren't acting, then what exactly caused that level of fear? Second, and more importantly, several very specific details appeared independently across witnesses who had no way of knowing what the others had said. The shoulder rotation was one of them. Multiple witnesses described the creature they saw turning its upper body to look in a direction without its neck moving the way a human neck would move, as though the head and neck were more fixed to the torso. That's a strange, specific detail. A stilt-like walking gait came up repeatedly as well, described in slightly different language across different interviews, but pointing at the same underlying motion. And the smell, a sharp, musky, ammonia-like odor, was reported by witnesses in different locations along the corridor. The AI's cross-witness consistency score for these interviews came back as atypically high for fabricated reports. That doesn't mean the AI declared the sightings real. What it means is that the level of specific, convergent detail across 8 independent accounts was statistically unusual in a way that deserved further attention rather than dismissal. There was also the matter of geography. When the AI mapped out the locations and timing of the 8 sightings, something emerged that wasn't random scatter. The reports moved in a pattern. Mantua, then Garrettsville, then Streetsboro, then Newton Township, then Lake Milton, a directional path running along the waterway and greenway system connecting those communities. The AI flagged this as a movement pattern consistent with territorial behavior rather than isolated, unconnected incidents. 8 witnesses, 5 days, 1 corridor, and not one of them knew the others existed. The AI had already flagged their consistency as statistically unlikely to be coincidence. But here is what made that flag mean something more than just an interesting data point about the spring of 2026. This wasn't the first time that corridor had produced this profile. 48 years before any of those 8 witnesses saw anything, a family in Stark County had already described the exact same smell, the exact same gait, and that exact same shoulder that turns without the neck following. And when the AI ran those archived interviews through the same analysis system, what it returned wasn't just a similarity, it returned a match. If the same profile existed decades earlier, then how long has this been happening unnoticed? In the summer of 1978, the Caton family, who lived on a rural property near Minerva in Stark County, Ohio, began experiencing something that disrupted their lives for weeks. A large, bipedal figure was repeatedly seen near their home and outbuildings, close enough on several occasions that family members got extended looks at it. The encounters were frightening enough that they eventually contacted local law enforcement. Deputies came out and walked the property. They didn't find the creature, but they did document something: a strong, distinctive ammonia-like smell in the areas where the figure had reportedly been seen. The Caton family case became one of the most discussed Bigfoot incidents in Ohio history, largely because it had law enforcement involvement and multiple witnesses across multiple nights. But over the decades, it got filed away as regional folklore. An interesting story, maybe even a credible one, but ultimately unverifiable and frozen in time. What the AI did with those archived interviews was run them through the exact same behavioral and descriptive analysis framework it had used on the 2026 witnesses. It was looking at the same markers: stress patterns, credibility indicators, the specificity and internal consistency of sensory descriptions. And across the Caton family's accounts from 1978, the same cluster of details came back: the ammonia odor, the bipedal gait that witnesses struggled to describe as quite human, and the shoulder rotation, that same specific physical characteristic of a creature whose upper body seemed to move differently than a human body does. The AI flagged the sensory and behavioral descriptors across the 1978 and 2026 reports as consistent with each other in a way that pointed toward the same biological profile. When it calculated the probability of those specific overlapping details arising from independent fabrications, accounts separated by nearly 5 decades, created by people who had no connection to each other, the result came back low. Not impossible, but low enough to be notable. The same smell and the same gait. The same shoulder that turns without the neck following. The AI didn't know those details came from 48 years apart when it first processed them. It just kept flagging them as the same profile. And when a trail camera in Salt Fork State Park captured something crossing a creek in 2014, the system had already built a file on this profile. It just hadn't connected the footage yet. What would happen once the footage was finally linked to it? Salt Fork State Park sits in Guernsey County in eastern Ohio and covers more than 17,000 acres, making it the largest state park in Ohio. It also has one of the highest concentrations of Bigfoot reports in the state, a fact that tends to get treated as a joke in casual conversation and a data point worth taking seriously in research circles. In 2014, a trail camera positioned near a creek crossing captured footage of a large, bipedal figure moving through the frame at night. When the AI analyzed the Salt Fork footage, it focused on what could be measured rather than what could be interpreted. Limb proportions were calculated and compared against known human ranges: the arm length relative to leg length, the width of the shoulders relative to overall height. The subject in the footage fell outside normal human proportions in multiple measurements. The AI also looked for what researchers call costume compensation patterns, the subtle behavioral adjustments that someone in a bulky, restrictive suit tends to make unconsciously, the slight hesitations and balance corrections that are hard to eliminate no matter how practiced you are. The Salt Fork footage returned no detectable costume compensation. The movement was fluid and consistent with a subject whose body proportions matched its movement, not a human body constrained by an exterior disguise. A trail camera captures what it captures and asks no questions. The AI asked them instead, and what it returned about the Salt Fork subject wasn't a verdict. It was the beginning of a file that kept getting thicker. 2 years later, a hiker in Hocking Hills State Park in Hocking County pointed a phone camera at something moving through dense brush on a trail above them. The footage was shaky, brief, and immediately questioned by anyone who saw it, because shaky phone footage of a dark figure in a forest is exactly what a person faking a Bigfoot encounter would produce. But when the AI analyzed the Hocking Hills footage, it wasn't looking at the image quality. It was looking at what it could measure despite the image quality. Stride length was isolated and calculated against the slope of the terrain the subject was moving across. The figure's stride was inconsistent with human gait on that particular incline, too long and distributed across the foot in a way that suggested a different skeletal structure in the lower leg and foot. More interesting was the behavioral analysis. The subject showed no awareness of the observer. There was no pause, no glance toward the camera, no change in pace or direction in response to the sound of the phone footage being taken. The AI flagged this specifically as an absence of observer awareness and an absence of performance behavior. The subject was simply moving through an environment it apparently knew well, with no indication that it registered being watched. If it didn't even react to being filmed, what does that say about how often it moves through areas without being seen? It didn't know it was being filmed. That behavioral signature would come up again 4 years later on a road in Portage County at speed in the middle of the night, caught not by a hiker with a phone, but by a dashboard camera that was never pointed at anything important. The Headwaters Trail dash cam footage from 2023 came from a driver traveling a Portage County Greenway road late at night. A large figure crossed the road ahead of the vehicle at speed, passing through the headlight beams and off into the tree line. The AI used the vehicle's speed and the crossing time to calculate the subject's pace, and from that and the frame data, it estimated the subject's height at around 7.5 feet. What the behavioral analysis flagged, in addition to the size, was the subject's complete non-reaction to the headlights. No flinch, no hesitation, no shielding of the eyes. Just a crossing, purposeful and unbothered, like something that had used that route before and had no particular reason to be startled by a car. 7.5 feet, crossing a road in Portage County without flinching at headlights. The AI had now logged the same biological profile in 3 separate Ohio locations across 9 years, but it hadn't yet seen the Portage County footage filmed 3 days into the 2026 flap, the footage shot by someone who had no idea what they were looking at. That footage is what changed everything, because when the AI finished analyzing it, it didn't just flag an unknown subject. It connected every single data point in the file. If all of this was leading somewhere, what would happen when the final piece was added? On March 7, 2026, one day after the first sighting report from the 2026 flap, an anonymous witness captured 34 seconds of phone footage near Mantua Center in Portage County. The witness didn't come forward immediately, and when they did, they asked for their identity to be kept private. They had simply been in the right place at the wrong time and filmed something they couldn't explain before it moved out of frame. Skeptics were quick to dismiss the footage for reasons that were, at least on the surface, reasonable. It was shaky. It was brief. It showed up during an already active news cycle about Bigfoot sightings in the exact area where it was filmed, which is exactly the kind of context that makes convenient footage look suspicious. 34 seconds of blurry phone video from a person who won't give their name, filmed during what was already being called a Bigfoot flap. That's not an easy sell. The AI didn't care about any of that context. It processed what the footage contained and returned what the data showed. Despite the video quality, the system was able to isolate 11 analyzable stride frames from the footage. Across 9 of those 11 frames, it confirmed what's called a mid-tarsal break, a flex point in the middle of the foot that doesn't exist in normal human anatomy, but has been documented in castings of alleged Bigfoot tracks for decades. This isn't something a person faking footage would think to include in their walking style, and it's not something that's easy to fake convincingly over multiple frames. The shoulder width of the subject exceeded the maximum range for human skeletal structure. The arm-to-leg ratio came in at 0.91, which is outside normal human range and also outside the range for gorillas, the largest primates with well-documented proportions. The overall gait consistency score across the analyzed frames was 94.1%, which is high enough to indicate a subject moving naturally in a familiar environment rather than performing or navigating carefully. And across the entire footage sample, the AI detected 0 fabrication markers. Then the AI did what it had been building toward through every prior data set it had processed. It cross-referenced the Portage County footage against all the previous samples in the file in real time. Would the similarities hold or collapse? The morphological match to the Salt Fork State Park footage from 2014 came back at 89.2%. The match to the Hocking Hills hiker footage from 2019 was 87.6%. The match to the Headwaters Trail dashcam footage from 2023 was 90.8%. These are not certainty numbers. They're similarity scores, and the AI was clear about what they represent. but they're also not noise. Scores in that range, across footage collected across 12 years from 4 different locations, indicate a consistent biological profile rather than a series of unrelated incidents or unrelated subjects. The shoulder rotation that the 2026 eyewitnesses had independently described in their interviews, that specific physical characteristic of the upper body turning without the neck following, was visible in the stride mechanics of the Portage County footage when the AI analyzed it frame by frame. The same detail that the Caton family had described in 1978, that 8 witnesses in 2026 had independently reported, was showing up in the way the subject in the footage actually moved. The territorial behavior flagged from the ammonia odor and the movement corridor in the 2026 sighting reports mapped directly onto the geographic area where the footage was taken. And when the AI plotted all 4 footage samples against the Northeast Ohio Waterway and Greenway network, every single one of them fell within the same connected system of water corridors and greenway paths cutting through the region. The system flagged this as a habitual range rather than a series of isolated incidents, a defined area being used consistently by something that knew the territory. The population modeling piece was the part that tended to stop people. A territorial range of the size indicated by the data spread covering the distance between Salt Fork, Hocking Hills, and the Portage County corridor is too large to be explained by a single animal moving through. The AI's modeling suggested that a range this size, used with this consistency over 12+ years, is more consistent with multiple individuals maintaining established routes than with one creature wandering across half the state, not one animal passing through. A group with territory, with behavior patterns, with routes they return to. The AI's final classification on the Portage County footage and on the integrated data set as a whole was unknown great ape Ohio variant, regionally distinct from Pacific Northwest samples in its proportions and behavioral profile, internally consistent across a 12-year footage dataset and a 48-year witness record. The Portage County footage didn't open a new case. It closed a loop that started in a Stark County backyard in 1978, and the AI had the data to show exactly how the loop closed. Ohio was never taken seriously as Bigfoot territory because it wasn't the Pacific Northwest, and for a long time that assumption was enough to close the conversation before it started. But the AI didn't carry that assumption, and it didn't care about regional reputation when it processed the data it was handed. It was given witness interviews, trail camera stills, dash cam video, and 34 shaky seconds of phone footage shot near Mantua. And every single time it returned the same result: a real subject, real motion, a real environment, and no known biological classification that fits what the data describes. The corridor has been active for at least 48 years. Whatever is using it has been doing so quietly, consistently, and just far enough out of frame until now. It was early September, a Tuesday morning, Mount Hood National Forest in Oregon. I knew the terrain of this trail well enough to run it without looking at my feet most of the time. I had the GoPro chest mounted because I was putting together footage for a video. Nothing dramatic, just a run edit. I parked at the trailhead a little after 6 in the morning, did a short warm-up, and headed out alone. 1 mile in, something crossed the trail ahead of me. It crossed at a full sprint, not bounding, not loping, but running with the kind of speed that takes up space in your field of vision and then is gone before you can form a complete thought about what you just saw. Upright, dark, enormous. It crossed maybe 30 yards ahead of me, from left to right, hit the tree line on the far side of the trail, and vanished into the undergrowth without slowing. The whole thing took less than 2 seconds. I stopped running. The forest went completely silent. What had just entered the woods that made everything else stop? Not gradually quiet the way a forest gets when something disturbs it and the birds settle down after a few minutes. Immediately silent, the kind of silence that has a before and an after, with nothing in between. No birds, no wind through the canopy, nothing moving in the brush on either side. I stood in that silence for what was probably 30 seconds and felt my heart rate drop from running pace down to something slower and more careful. Then I started running again. I had gone maybe 40 yards when I heard the first footfall behind me. It was bipedal. That was the first thing I registered. Not 4 impacts in sequence the way a bear or a deer moves, but 2, left, right, heavy and fast and spaced in a way that suggested a very long stride. The trail behind me had a slight uphill grade in that section, and I could hear the footfalls working against it without any apparent effort, each one hitting the packed dirt with a concussive weight that I could feel in my chest more than hear with my ears. I looked back. The GoPro caught it, a Bigfoot at full sprint, roughly 40 yards back, coming down the center of the trail. Dark brown fur, 9 feet tall at minimum, arms pumping in full running form the way a trained sprinter uses their arms, not swinging loosely the way you might expect. The stride was enormous. I tried to estimate it later using landmarks in the footage and came up with something close to 8 feet per step. Each footfall hit the trail hard enough that the audio track on the GoPro has a rhythmic thumping underneath everything else in that section of the recording. If something that big could move that fast, what chance did a trail runner actually have? I stopped looking back and ran as hard as I could. Trail running and survival running are not the same thing. Trail running involves pacing, reading terrain, conserving energy for climbs, managing your breathing around effort. It is a controlled thing. You are always making small decisions. When to push, when to ease off, where to put your foot on a technical section. Survival running is none of that. It is just output. Every system maxed out immediately, form degrading in the first 30 seconds. Nothing held in reserve. No ceiling on what you are willing to spend. I went to full output in about 4 strides and held it. My breathing went ragged fast and stayed that way. The trail ahead was slightly downhill for the next 200 yards, and I let gravity contribute to whatever my legs were doing and kept my eyes forward. The gap closed anyway. I could hear it without looking, the footfalls getting louder, the spacing between them making it clear that whatever pace I had found, the Bigfoot was running faster. I looked back again at what felt like 30 yards, but was probably less, and saw it still in full stride, not appearing to breathe hard, not appearing to have any particular urgency about it, just running with a kind of mechanical efficiency that had no ceiling I could identify. Long arms, wide shoulders, head held forward, eyes straight ahead on the trail. Eyes on me. Was I watching something that already knew how this chase was going to end? The downhill section came and I opened a small gap, maybe 5 yards, and held it for roughly 20 seconds. Then the terrain flattened and the gap disappeared in a matter of strides. The Bigfoot ran the downhill like it was flat ground. No adjustment in its body, no shift in its form, just the same efficient stride eating up the same amount of trail per second, regardless of the angle. I was screaming, I found out later when I reviewed the audio. Not words, just sound, the involuntary noise that comes out of a person when their body has understood something that their brain is still catching up to. I did not know I was doing it at the time. The gap was down to 25 yards and still closing when the trail narrowed. The single track through that section of Mount Hood runs tight, maybe 3 feet wide, with the tree canopy dropping low on both sides where the younger growth crowds in against the established trail corridor. The light went from gray and open to darker and more compressed, and the change in the sound was immediate. The Bigfoot's footfalls got louder in the enclosed space, more directional, easier to track. 20 yards back, still closing. I hit a hard switchback, a sharp left-hand turn that dropped me briefly out of the direct line, and gained maybe 3 seconds. I heard the Bigfoot hit the turn behind me, and I looked back expecting it to slow, expecting the angle to cost it something. Was this the first mistake it would make in the chase? It left the trail entirely. It went straight through the brush on the inside of the turn, crashed through the undergrowth, and came out on the far side of the switchback, already realigned with the trail. It lost almost nothing. The 3 seconds became 1 second, maybe less. I watched it happen over my shoulder with the GoPro capturing the whole thing, and what hit me was not just the speed but the decision-making. It had looked at the switchback, done the geometry of it, and chosen the shorter path. That is not an animal reacting. That is a calculation. Mid-turn, I got its face on camera for the first time, not from 40 yards, but from close enough that the GoPro resolved the details clearly. Wide face, flat across the features, with a heavy jaw and a prominent brow ridge. The eyes were forward-facing and dark and locked straight ahead. Not on the trail, on me. The expression, if I had to describe it, was not rage and not excitement. It was focus. The expression of something that was very good at this particular thing and was fully engaged in doing it. If that focus never broke, how long before it finally caught me? Then it vocalized. A sharp, explosive bark, not the drawn-out howl that people describe in most Sasquatch accounts, but a single, percussive sound, short and directional, the kind of sound that you feel in your sternum before your ears fully register it. Not a warning, not a territorial display. Something purposeful. I flinched physically when it happened and nearly lost my footing on the turn, my stride breaking apart for a half-second, before I found it again and kept moving. Then something answered it from the left flank. A different call, slightly lower in pitch, from a position maybe 50 yards into the trees to my left and ahead of my current position. Not behind me. Ahead and to the left. Already repositioned, already waiting. I hadn't heard it move. I hadn't heard anything move. Whatever was on my left flank had gotten there without making a sound, which meant it had been moving while the one behind me had been making noise, while I had been focused on the one behind me. The two calls overlapped for a moment, the one behind me and the one to my left, and the pattern of them, the back and forth of it, was not random noise. It was not the ambient sound of a forest reacting to a disturbance. It was the same structured exchange as any two people calling to each other across a distance to establish position, to confirm that the other was in place, to signal that the setup was ready. Had I already been running into an ambush without realizing it? Had every step I'd taken since this started been a step they had already planned for me? The Bigfoot behind me was not just chasing me, it was driving me. There is a difference between those two things. A chase is reactive, it follows you wherever you go. What was happening here was directional. The one behind me had been pushing me left from the moment it stepped onto the trail, and the one on the left flank had been positioned ahead of me to the left to receive whatever the one behind me delivered. I had been running a line someone else had drawn. I understood it in the same instant that I understood I had been going left, following the trail left around the switchback, away from the call on the left flank, which meant I had been going exactly where the one behind me was pushing me to go. I cut hard right off the trail and into the open forest on the right side, angling away from both vocalizations, trying to break the geometry of whatever was being set up around me. The Sasquatch behind me adjusted without missing a beat. Had it expected that move all along? I heard it leave the trail and come into the open forest after me, crashing through the undergrowth with no apparent concern about the noise it was making. The one on the left flank went quiet. I could not hear it anymore, which was not reassuring. It did not mean it had stopped. It meant it had stopped making sound. The rocky section comes about 1.5 miles into that trail system, a stretch where the path crosses a ridge of exposed basalt and the footing gets technical. Irregular surfaces, loose stones at the edges, roots breaking through between the rock faces. Under normal conditions, I slowed down through that section and picked my steps. Under these conditions, I did not slow down and I did not pick my steps. And about 30 yards into the rock section, a root caught my lead foot and I went down hard. I slid on the basalt for several feet, tore the knee of my running tights, felt the skin go on my right palm, and came to a stop against a larger rock at the trail's edge. The GoPro stayed mounted, the chest harness held, and the footage from those seconds is some of the clearest in the entire recording because the camera was briefly stationary, pointing back up the trail. The Bigfoot was 15 yards away. How much distance is 15 yards when something that large is already moving at full speed? It had closed from 25 yards to 15 in the 3 seconds it took me to fall and stop. 15 yards is 45 feet. I know what 45 feet looks like on a trail, and I know what it looks like on that specific piece of footage, and it is close enough that the GoPro resolved the fur texture on its chest and shoulders, the individual fingers of its right hand as the arms swung in its stride, and the visible cloud of breath in the cold morning air coming from its nose and mouth as it ran. It stopped when I stopped. Not immediately, it took a step or two to decelerate, but it stopped and stood there at 15 yards while I scrambled back to my feet and got my legs under me. My right knee had taken the impact and was sending a hot, sharp signal up my leg with every movement, not a signal I could ignore. The kind of signal that tells you something structural has been compromised, and the next 40 minutes are going to be a different experience than the previous 40. If it could see that I was injured, what did that change about the way this was going to end? I started running again on the damaged knee, and the Bigfoot started running again behind me. And then it slowed down, not to a stop, not to a walk. It slowed to exactly the pace I was now capable of running, and it held that pace, and it maintained the same gap. 15 yards, not closing, not falling back, matching me. I looked back twice in the next 30 seconds, and both times it was there. Same distance, same steady stride, watching me move with the same forward-locked focus it had shown since the beginning. This was worse than the sprint. The sprint had been terrifying, but it had been simple. Something fast coming at you requires a simple response, which is to run. This was not simple. This was the Bigfoot demonstrating that it knew I was hurt, that it understood what hurt meant in terms of what I could do next, and that it had made a decision to wait rather than close. It was patient in a way that felt deliberate and measured. It was waiting me out. If it was waiting instead of attacking, what exactly was it waiting for? The trail opened up about a quarter mile past the rock section, a stretch of maybe 50 yards where the trees pulled back on both sides and the sightline extended. The morning light was fuller in the open section, and after the compressed darkness of the narrow trail, the brightness registered as a physical relief, the way light always does when you have been in the dark long enough. The second Bigfoot was standing in the trail ahead of me. It had stepped out of the tree line on the left side of the trail and stopped, facing me, arms at its sides, completely still, not approaching, just there, in the center of the trail, blocking the forward line. I skidded to a stop on the open trail, and the one behind me stopped simultaneously, still at 15 yards, as if we had all agreed to pause. Was this the moment the chase officially turned into something else? I was standing between two Bigfoot on an open trail with a damaged knee and no cover within reach. The open section of trail that had looked like relief 30 seconds ago, the brightness of it, the space, had turned into a problem. There was nowhere on that 50-yard stretch where I could not be clearly seen from both directions, and both directions currently had a Bigfoot in them. The second one was slightly shorter than the first, maybe 8.5 feet, but broader across the chest and shoulders, with fur that ran more auburn than dark brown, a reddish-brown tone that caught the open light differently than the first one had in the shadows of the tree canopy. It stood with the same quality of stillness the first one had shown when it stopped, not frozen, not tense, just still in the way that something is still when it has no reason to move yet. Its eyes were forward-facing and dark, the same as the first. It was looking at me the same way the first one had looked at me. Neither of them moved. Neither of them made a sound. The only audio on the GoPro in that section is my breathing. Fast, shallow. The breathing of someone whose body is trying to process more than it has the capacity to process at one time. I went right. There was no calculation in it. The trail was blocked ahead, and there was a Bigfoot behind me, and the only open direction was right, where the ground dropped away from the trail edge into a shallow creek drainage, a rocky channel with maybe 6 inches of water running through it, the kind of seasonal drainage that floods in winter and runs low in September. I went over the trail edge and down the bank and hit the creek at a run, and my trail shoes went onto wet rock immediately, and I nearly went down again before I found the footing. Would the water and rock slow them down the way it slowed me? The creek bed was rough going, uneven basalt covered in a thin layer of algae. The water cold enough that I could feel it through my shoes on contact, the banks on both sides dropping away steeply enough that climbing out would cost time, and the knee did not want to do the lateral movement required. I stayed in the water and ran. The Bigfoot behind me followed into the creek. I heard it hit the bank and come down, and then I heard each footfall in the water behind me. A deep concussive splash every time one of those feet came down in the drainage, the sound of it reverberating off the rock walls of the channel. I looked back, and the GoPro got a full rear shot of it, mid-stride in the water, both arms out slightly for balance, the creek exploding off each footfall in a white spray that caught the early light. It moved across the wet rock with total ease. Where my trail shoes were slipping and forcing me to shorten my stride and drop my pace, it moved as if the surface were no different from the packed dirt of the trail. No adjustment, no slipping, no reduction in pace. If the terrain slowed me, but not it, how long before the distance disappeared again? My knee was getting worse with every stride on the uneven rock. The altitude was working against me. That section of trail sits above 3,000 feet, and the thinner air at elevation is something you adapt to over time, but never fully account for when your body is already under maximum stress. I was deteriorating faster than my fear could compensate for. I checked the GoPro battery out loud. I heard myself do it on the audio later, 34%, and kept moving. The drainage curved left after about 100 yards and then opened onto a wider section where the banks dropped to almost nothing, just a low step up onto flat ground covered in fern and moss. I pulled myself up out of the creek and looked back. The Bigfoot had stopped at the bank. Why would something that had followed me this far suddenly refuse to climb out after me? It was standing at the edge of the drainage, in the water, watching me climb out onto the flat ground. It did not follow me up the bank. It stood there and watched me go. And I stood there for a moment, watching it watch me, both of us breathing hard. Me audibly, it in those visible cold air clouds from its nose and mouth. And then I turned and ran into the open forest. The second Bigfoot was gone. No sound from the left flank, no movement in the trees ahead. I ran through the open forest section without a trail to follow, picking the line through the trees that looked most open, angling in the direction I knew the fire road to be from memory of the trail map. The knee was talking to me on every stride. My water bottle was mostly empty. The GoPro battery was at 34%. Could I reach the fire road before either of them cut me off again? No sound from the left flank the whole way. The second Bigfoot had gone quiet after I came up out of the creek and stayed quiet. The original one, the dark brown one, the first, I could no longer hear behind me either. No footfalls on the forest floor, no breathing, no movement in the undergrowth. Either they had stopped following me or they had gotten better at doing it quietly, and I had no way to know which. The forest was silent all the way to the convergence. I came back onto the trail proper through a gap in the undergrowth about 200 yards from where I had gone off it. The fire road was visible through the trees ahead. The line of it, the different quality of light that open ground has compared to closed canopy, maybe 200 yards away, possibly a little less. Close enough that I could see it clearly and hold that image in my head as something concrete. Out of nowhere, both Bigfoot emerged from the trees behind me at the same time. Had they been shadowing me the entire time without making a sound? They came out onto the trail simultaneously from opposite sides, the first one from the right, the second from the left. And they were 50 yards back when they appeared. They were not running. They were walking side by side on the trail at a steady, unhurried pace, and the shift from what the chase had been to what this was hit me harder than most of what had come before it. A chase is comprehensible. Something chasing you is operating on a logic you can understand, even if you cannot outrun it. This was different. They were not chasing anymore. They were behind me, and they were walking, and the word that kept coming back to me as I watched them over my shoulder was escort. They were walking me out, 100 yards to the fire road. I did not slow down. The knee was screaming, and my lungs were at their limit, but I did not slow down. And the two Bigfoot behind me kept the same 50-yard distance without any apparent effort, walking at a pace that covered ground faster than their relaxed gait suggested. I filmed them over my shoulder for most of that final 100 yards. The footage is steady enough to see both of them clearly, side by side, the difference in their coloring visible in the open light, moving together with the same forward stillness they had shown every time they stopped. If they could close the gap whenever they wanted, why were they making sure it stayed exactly 50 yards? I hit the fire road at a dead run and crossed it. On the far side, the trail continued down toward the parking lot, and I went down it another 40 or 50 yards before I finally slowed and stopped and turned around. My legs had made the decision before my brain did. They simply stopped taking strides. The Bigfoot had stopped at the fire road. Was the road the boundary they had been pushing me toward the entire time? Both of them were standing at the tree line on the far side of the road, in the shadow where the trail met the forest edge. Still, silent, watching me across the open width of the fire road, the way they had been watching me for the past mile and a half, with that same forward, locked attention that I had not been able to read as anger or excitement or anything else I had a name for. I raised the GoPro and pointed it at them and held it there and filmed them standing at the tree line. Then the first Bigfoot, the original one, the dark brown one, the one that had crossed the trail in front of me a mile in and started all of this, turned away from me and walked to the largest tree on the road's edge. A Douglas fir, 4 feet across at the base, maybe more. An old tree, the kind of tree that has been there long enough to anchor itself deep into the basalt and hardpan below the soil. The kind of tree that does not move when the wind comes through hard in November because its root system has 30 or 40 years of grip on the ground around it. What could it possibly intend to do with a tree that size? The Bigfoot gripped the trunk with both hands. The fingers wrapped around the near side of the bark and the arms pulled, and for 1 second, nothing happened. 1 second of what looked like resistance, the tree holding, and then the sound started. A deep crack from somewhere below the ground, then a groan that ran up through the trunk and out through the canopy, and then a tearing sound that was enormous and low and continuous as the root system came up out of the earth on the far side of the trunk, the soil breaking open around the base of the tree in a rough circle, the root ball lifting like the edge of a lid being pried off. The GoPro audio clipped on the loudest part of it. The recording distorts and comes back. And then the tree was tilting, slowly at first, and then not slowly at all, the full height of it swinging in a long arc across the fire road and hitting the ground on the far side with an impact that came up through my feet. If it could uproot something that massive without hesitation, what exactly was it trying to communicate to me? The dust settled. The echo of it moved through the trees in both directions. The Bigfoot stood over the fallen trunk with both hands still resting on the bark. A Douglas fir of that size, 4 feet at the base, carries somewhere between 40 and 60,000 pounds of weight. I looked that up later. I spent some time with that number. It turned its head and looked directly at me. Not at the tree, not at the road, not at the second Bigfoot standing 10 feet away, at me. Across the width of the fire road, over the trunk of the tree now lying across it, through the dust still settling in the morning air. It held that for 5 full seconds. I counted them because the GoPro was recording, and I wanted the footage to have a number attached to it. Was it making sure I understood that the display had been meant specifically for me? Then both Bigfoot turned and walked into the forest, and were gone. The trees closed behind them. No sound, no vocalization, no crashing through undergrowth. Just gone, the way the first one had been when it crossed the trail in front of me at the start of this, before I understood what kind of morning it was going to be. If they could disappear that easily, how often had they been watching runners on that trail without anyone realizing it? The tree was still across the fire road when I drove past it on the way out. I did not stop. I did not get out of the car and stand next to it and take a picture. I drove past it and kept driving and did not stop until I was back on the highway. Stellan Vare had worked on investigative cases for 11 years. A timber called him 4 days after their bulldozer went missing from a contested logging site in the Six Rivers National Forest in Northern California. Not stolen, not broken down, but missing in the sense that pieces of it had been found in 3 separate locations and nobody could explain how they had gotten there or what had been strong enough to separate them from the rest of the machine. The first step was collecting the camera grid the logging crew had already installed. Before he even walked the terrain or studied topographic maps, Stellan drove the access roads and flagged each motion-activated trail camera the loggers had mounted around the worksite and along the road where the machine had last been confirmed operational. The company had placed them weeks earlier to document equipment activity and keep records during the dispute, which meant the cameras had been watching the area long before the bulldozer disappeared. Over the years, those cameras had captured bears wandering through cut blocks, vandals slipping past locked gates, poachers checking game trails, and the occasional lost hiker cutting through timber roads after dark. In 11 years of reviewing footage like that, they had never recorded anything that made Stellan sit in his truck and replay the same clip multiple times before he could bring himself to step outside. Camera 4 was positioned along the edge of a dense section of old-growth Douglas fir, mounted at chest height on a tree just off the service road that ran along the upper logging boundary. The footage was 1 minute and 39 seconds long. Stellan had watched it on the small screen of his laptop, parked at the edge of that same service road with the engine off and the afternoon light coming in flat through the windshield. How could less than 2 minutes of footage contain the answer to a mystery that had already scattered a bulldozer across the forest? The first seconds showed the road at the point where it curved past the tree line before opening into the staging area. The light was poor. A heavy overstory kept the ground mostly in shadow, with a few narrow shafts coming through at angles, shifting slightly as the branches moved in a high wind that couldn't quite reach the ground. For the first 2 seconds, there was nothing. Then something moved in the shadows between the trees, and Stellan felt his body go still in a way it did not usually go still. What kind of thing moves through a dark forest at that size and that speed and doesn't bother to stay in the shadows? A Sasquatch stepped into one of the narrow shafts of light, and the light was enough. It was upright. It was massive. Reddish-brown hair covered it from head to foot, dense and layered, the coat thickest across the shoulders and upper back, where it bunched and shifted with each stride. It moved with the kind of weight that you don't fake, not the performed heaviness of someone trying to walk large, but the deep structural weight of something that has never once in its life needed to consider what might be bigger than it. Every step compressed the road surface with a finality that had nothing theatrical in it. Stellan's first thought, embarrassingly, was that the camera had malfunctioned. Some trick of the lens, a compression artifact, something that would resolve into a bear or a downed tree if he just let it settle. His second thought arrived about a half-second later, when the full figure came into the light and the scale of it became undeniable, and that second thought had no words attached to it. His hands had gone still on the laptop keyboard. He was not aware of deciding to stop moving. He just had. If the footage wasn't a malfunction, then what exactly was Stellan watching walk across the same road he was parked beside? 8 feet tall, at minimum. He had done enough outdoor work, enough time measuring elk trails and bear markings against known reference points, to have a decent eye for height and scale, and he had never been far off. This was 8 feet, possibly a shade more, and he arrived at that number without having to think hard about it. The dead fir it passed at 11 seconds gave him his reference. The top of its head cleared a branch he could later measure at 7 feet 9 inches from the ground. The shoulders were the part that most resisted any effort to file it under something normal. A human being, even a very large one, has shoulders that fit inside a certain range, a range defined by the width of the skeleton beneath them, by the limits of what muscle can do to that frame. These did not fit inside that range. They were impossibly wide, rolling forward slightly with each stride in a way that suggested the whole upper body was built around a different set of proportions entirely. And the arms that hung from them were long in a way that had nothing to do with any human proportion Stellan had a reference for. They swung past the knees in a slow, heavy rhythm, each pendulum arc covering more distance than it should, the kind of rhythm that belongs to something that covers a lot of ground with very little effort, something that has never needed to hurry because hurrying has never been the point. If this forest was its territory, how long had it been watching the machines come through and tear it up? And how long had it been deciding what to do about them? Stellan watched it and noticed where it was going, the staging area. The bulldozer sat at the far edge of the service road where the crew had left it the previous evening, blade down, engine cold, sitting on the same packed gravel it had been sitting on when the operator signed off. The Sasquatch was walking directly toward it, with the same purposeful, unhurried gait it had held since the moment it entered the frame. There was no detour, no hesitation, no slowing to assess the open ground or the unfamiliar terrain of the cleared road. It was walking toward that machine the way a person walks toward something they have already made a decision about. The decision had been made somewhere else before the camera ever picked it up, and what was happening now was simply the execution. The gait was unhurried. That detail landed harder than the size. A Sasquatch that large, moving in the open, along a service road, and there was no urgency in it at all. No scan of the terrain, no checking of angles, none of the low-level alertness that wild animals carry through their bodies even at rest. Why would a wild creature move across an open road without even the smallest trace of caution? Wild animals are always, on some level, listening. Even the ones at the top of the food chain have something residual in them, some background process running beneath behavior, keeping a loose inventory of the environment. Bigfoot had none of that. It moved through the space the way you move through your own house in the dark, unhurried and unafraid, because every part of the space is already known. This was the pace of something that knew exactly where it was going and had no particular reason to rush. At 18 seconds, Bigfoot slowed, just slightly, and its head turned, not toward the camera, toward the staging area ahead, where the machine sat in the fading afternoon light at the edge of the cleared ground. It held that angle for about 2 seconds, then turned back and kept walking. The motion was so specific and so calm that Stellan watched it 3 times before he allowed himself to move on. Not assessment, not curiosity. It already knew the machine was there. The head turn was something else, the particular quality of attention you give to something you have been thinking about for a while and are now almost close enough to reach. Stellan had seen that quality in human subjects on surveillance footage. He had not expected to see it here. At 31 seconds, the service road passed under a gap in the canopy where a large tree had come down at some point, and the wider beam of light that came through that gap caught the hair across Bigfoot's shoulders in detail. Individual strands moved in a faint breeze, each at its own speed, the longer ones catching more air and moving further, the shorter ones barely shifting. It was the movement of real hair on a living body, not costume material, not anything synthetic, but actual biological material, each strand independent, responding to a small amount of air moving through the forest the way any animal's coat would respond to it. Stellan had worked enough wildlife cases to know what hair looked like on a large animal in natural light, and what he was seeing in those 2 seconds matched that in a way that he could not argue himself out of. It kept walking. The Bulldozer was visible now at the far right margin of the camera's field. The wide blade, the upper cab structure, the bulk of the machine sitting exactly where the crew had left it. Bigfoot moved into the cleared staging ground, and the camera held its full profile. The cone-shaped skull, the heavy brow ridge above the flat face, the wide shoulders rolling forward in that consistent stride. It was still moving without any change of pace. It had not slowed. It had not stopped to evaluate. Whatever it intended to do when it reached that machine, the decision was already behind it, made and settled somewhere in the dark hours before dawn. Not something it was still working out as it crossed the open ground. If the decision had already been made hours earlier, what had convinced it that the Bulldozer needed to be dealt with? At 45 seconds, Bigfoot stopped. The stop was total, not a slow deceleration, not a shift of weight, but an immediate halt, the way a body stops when it has arrived at the thing it came for. It was standing at the front of the Bulldozer. The machine came up to roughly its mid-chest. Stellan had the dimensions of a Bulldozer memorized from the case file. Operating weight around 20,000 pounds. Blade width 14 feet. Cab height just under 10 feet to the exhaust stack. He held those numbers in his head and looked at the Sasquatch standing in front of it and felt something happen in the back of his mind that was not comfortable. Then the head turned, not toward the machine, toward the camera. It found the lens with the same precision it had found its destination, directly, without a search, without the half-second of scanning that would have been present if it hadn't already known where to look. Bigfoot's eyes found the lens and held it. How long had it known the camera was there before it decided to look at it? The expression on the face was not what he would have expected. There was no startle in it, no alarm, none of the wide-eye tension that comes through clearly on any large mammal when it encounters something unexpected. The expression was flat, unreadable in the specific way that a face becomes unreadable when the emotion behind it is something unfamiliar. Not the absence of expression, but an expression that had no match in anything Stellan knew how to read. If the creature wasn't surprised by the camera or the machine, then what exactly had it come here expecting to find? If he had to name it, and he resisted doing so, he would have called it acknowledgement. The eye contact lasted 3 seconds. Midway through those 3 seconds, there was a small movement in the irises, a slight shift in the direction of gaze, not dramatic, not a full look away, but the micro-movement that happens when a brain is actively working behind the eyes. Bigfoot was not staring, not frozen, but processing the camera with the same deliberate efficiency it had applied to everything else in its path. Whatever the camera represented, the evaluation was brief. It had been located, classified, and deprioritized in the span of 3 seconds, and then it was simply no longer the focus. That kind of response, finding a thing, deciding about it, continuing, is not the behavior of instinct. Instinct is louder and less precise. What happened at 45 seconds was a decision. After 3 seconds, Bigfoot turned back to the machine. Stellan stayed on the frame, the moment just after the eye contact ended and the Sasquatch turned its attention back to the bulldozer. For a long time, the way you stay on a frame when some part of you is hoping the pause will give the image somewhere else to go. He had reviewed hundreds of hours of trail camera footage over 11 years. He had seen wildlife, vandals, trespassers, livestock. He had a working vocabulary for what human damage looked like and what animal damage looked like and where the boundary between them sat. He had never once, in 11 years, expected to need a category on the other side of both of those things at once. If the answer to the bulldozer damage didn't fit human behavior or animal behavior, what exactly had Stellan been hired to investigate? At 59 seconds, it started. Bigfoot placed both hands against the front blade of the dozer. Not a strike, a placement, deliberate and measured, with the flat of both palms against the upper edge of the steel, fingers curling slightly over the lip. There was no wind-up. There was no gathering of effort, no widening of the stance, no visible bracing. The body didn't shift. It just applied force, and the blade moved. Stellan watched it and thought about the numbers. To move something that heavy from a standing position with no leverage, no running start, no equipment of any kind, through the application of hand pressure alone, he could not finish the calculation in a way that came out as possible. He watched it happen on the screen anyway. The machine rocked backward. Not dramatically, not a catastrophic lurch, a single, authoritative rock, the tracks on the far side lifting a few inches off the ground before the weight came back down. The settling impact when it came back down was audible on the microphone. Bigfoot had not moved. Its feet were in the same position. Its posture was the same. It had pushed 20,000 pounds backward a measurable distance without leaning into it, and whatever that had cost it was not visible anywhere on its body. Then it gripped the blade and pulled. The sound the microphone captured at 1 minute and 4 seconds was not a sound Stellan had a reference for. It was metal under stress, the particular dense, tearing quality of structural steel separating at points it was not designed to separate at, layered over a lower, sustained groan that was the frame of the machine responding to a force it had not been engineered to withstand. If the frame of the bulldozer was already failing under the strain, how much more of it could the creature take apart? The blade came away in 2 pieces. The first piece went somewhere to the left, out of frame. The second piece the Sasquatch held in one hand, examined briefly in the way you examine a thing that has just come apart in a manner that surprises you slightly, and then set down on the ground beside the machine with a precision that was almost careful. He replayed those 4 seconds 6 times. What he was looking for, what part of his brain kept insisting had to be there, was some visible exertion in the body, some shift of the hips, some drop of the shoulder, some change of breath visible in the chest or the rib cage. In any large animal under load, you can read the effort. The spine curves toward the resistance. The legs drive into the ground. Something moves that tells you the body is working against something that requires working against. None of that was present. The Sasquatch had removed a steel blade from a 20,000-pound dozer, and the only thing that changed in its body was the position of its arms. Stellan had no explanation for that. He had no framework that could hold it. He just watched it again, and the footage kept showing him the same thing it had shown him every previous time. If the evidence refused to change no matter how many times he replayed it, how was he supposed to explain it to the people who had hired him? He looked at the paused frame on his laptop screen, the machine with its blade gone, the Sasquatch standing beside it with what had been solid welded structural steel lying in two pieces in the gravel, and thought about every equipment damage case he had worked that ended with a clear explanation, and how none of them had pointed anywhere near here. Most equipment damage in wilderness had one of four causes: vandalism, weather, mechanical failure, or transportation accident. He had never once, in 11 years, needed a fifth category. He sat in the truck for probably 2 minutes without moving, and then he started the clip again. Bigfoot moved down the left side of the machine. The same unhurried gait, the same absence of urgency. Walking the length of the dozer the way a person walks the length of something they are inspecting and taking inventory of. At the track assembly, it stopped and crouched, and Stellan lost the upper body to the camera angle. And then there was a sound like a rifle shot, and the camera image shook from the vibration of it, and when the Sasquatch stood back up and kept walking, it was carrying a section of track chain that weighed, by Stellan's later estimate, somewhere between 400 and 500 pounds. It carried it one-handed, the chain hanging in a loose loop from its fist, swinging slightly with each stride in the way things swing when they are being carried by something that does not find their weight particularly notable. It stood at the far end of the machine and held still. It had done something deliberate, and now it was simply standing with the chain at its side, upright and without any shift of weight, in the specific stillness that is different from rest. Not the stillness of something that has stopped because it is tired. The stillness of something that has stopped because it is done with one part and is now considering the next. If this was only one step in a process, what part of the machine would it decide to remove next? The force required to produce what the microphone had captured was not something he could talk himself past. He had worked enough outdoor cases to have a working understanding of what a large body in motion sounds like when it connects with a solid surface, when it bends steel, when it removes load-bearing components from machinery designed to operate in the harshest available terrain. What he had heard from 1 minute and 4 seconds onward was not close to anything a human being was capable of producing without cutting equipment, without time, without preparation of any kind. The effort simply did not register on the Sasquatch's body. Nothing changed in its face. Nothing changed in its posture. It had torn the blade off a 20,000-pound machine and removed a section of track assembly and was now holding 500 pounds of chain in one fist, with the same affect as someone holding a set of car keys. It swung what it had removed as if this required roughly the same amount of attention as opening a door, and then it stood and looked at the rest of the machine, and the expression on its face was the particular blankness of something that is deciding what comes next. If removing a bulldozer blade registered the same way opening a door did, what would actually constitute effort for something like this? The waiting was the part that resisted any clean explanation. This was not random destruction. It was not territorial aggression in any documented form. It was not feeding behavior. It was something that looked, from the outside, like work. A job being done with professional composure, by something that knew exactly what it was doing and had no need to rush through it. Bigfoot had arrived at a specific machine and was working through it with the methodical attention of something that had a clear idea of what it wanted the end state to look like. All of that had the shape of intention, of a plan formed somewhere else in the dark and the quiet of this forest, and now simply being executed one component at a time with no wasted motion and no visible exertion. Stellan had been on enough investigative calls to know the difference between damage caused by force and damage caused by intention. Force leaves patterns that are directional and predictable. The vectors of an impact, the trajectory of a slide, the failure points of metal stressed beyond its rating. Intention leaves patterns that are selective. A machine stripped of specific components, left in a specific condition, arranged in a way that suggests the end state was the objective from the beginning. What Camera 4 had captured had the shape of intention, from the moment the Sasquatch placed its palms against the blade to the moment it stood with the track chain in its fist. And it was the most unsettling thing Stellan had encountered in 11 years of work that occasionally turned up unsettling things. He thought about that while he watched the clip a second time. The components had been removed in a sequence that made a kind of structural sense. The blade first, which bore the weight of the forward end. The track section next, which compromised the machine's mobility. If you wanted to disable a bulldozer permanently, if you wanted to render it irreparable rather than merely inoperative, that was roughly the order in which a knowledgeable person would work. He did not know what to do with the implication of that. He set it to the side and kept watching. If the sequence mirrored how a trained operator would disable a machine, how did the Sasquatch know where to start? At 1 minute and 14 seconds, the tree line on the far side of the staging area moved. Not the way wind moves a tree line, not a general wave-like shift of branches and upper canopy. The movement was low and specific, the kind that comes from a large body pushing through dense brush, and it happened at a single point in the tree line directly across the staging area from where Bigfoot stood. A second Sasquatch stepped out. Stellan's first impression was size, and his second impression was that his first impression had been wrong because he had used the first Bigfoot as his baseline for large. The second Sasquatch was bigger, noticeably, significantly bigger. He estimated somewhere between 9.5 and 10 feet, broader across the chest and shoulders, the coat darker, almost black in the shadows at the edge of the staging area, and shifting toward a very deep brown, only when it moved far enough into the light. Each step carried a mass that was visible in the way the ground responded, in the way the gravel compressed and shifted with each footfall. If the first one had already dismantled part of the machine alone, what could the larger one do when it reached it? It moved directly to the dozer cab. No inspection, no pause. It gripped the cab structure at the roofline with both hands, and what it did next happened in the same quiet, businesslike way everything had happened since the first Bigfoot walked into frame. The cab came off the frame, not twisted, not folded, separated cleanly at the mounting points, lifted away from the machine as a unit, and set down on the far side of the clearing with the same considered placement the first Sasquatch had used when it set down the blade section. The roll cage was still intact, the seat was still inside it. The whole assembly sat upright on the gravel, and the machine beneath it was open to the sky, its internal workings exposed to the forest air, as if the cab had simply been removed for maintenance by someone who knew exactly which bolts to pull. The two Sasquatches stood in the staging area and faced what remained of the dozer. There was no sound between them on the microphone, no vocalization, no clicking, no signal of any kind. They stood in the remaining light with the stripped machine between them, and they were still, and whatever was happening between them did not require sound. If they weren't communicating out loud, how had they coordinated the work so precisely? Then the larger one looked up. It found the camera immediately. The head came up, and the eyes went directly to the lens without a scan, without a search, without the delay that would have been present if it didn't already know where to look. It held eye contact for 3 seconds, the same duration as the first Sasquatch, and the expression Stellan saw on its face across that brief span of footage was not curiosity. It was not alarm. It was something that he kept turning over in his mind on the drive back south and could not find a better word for than acknowledgement. Not surprise that the camera was there, not aggression toward it. Something closer to the look a person gives when they notice they are being watched and want you to know they noticed. The clip ended. 99 seconds of footage, and Stellan had no idea what to do with any of it. If the creatures knew they were being watched, had the camera captured exactly what they wanted someone to see? The Halverson equipment had been at that site for 3 weeks. Whatever had been decided about it had been decided somewhere in that window, in the old-growth forest above the staging area, in the dark, with no documentation of any kind, no record of the deliberation, no way to read the outcome, until Camera 4 picked up the result in 1 minute and 39 seconds of footage. This was not a territorial behavior that happened to be caught on camera. It was a territorial behavior that was delivered to one. They had not been surprised by his equipment. They had used it. The destruction was not something that Stellan's investigation had uncovered. It was something that had been staged for his investigation, or for whoever came after him, or for the footage to eventually reach whoever at the Halverson Timber Company had the authority to decide whether the machines went back in.